Okay, a pleasant day to everyone. In this recorded session, we will discuss the second part for architectural requirements, which includes site survey and topographic details. Now, please do note that some of the concepts discussed here are review topics from your surveying subject. I just want to point out also that I just um, want to review these concepts and how you can use this for uh, design purposes of your residential sites. That includes your proposed house design and also the proposed site development plan. In this first part of a recorded session, we'll first discuss site concepts and performance. And then later, we'll talk about residential sites. And in that aspect, we will discuss the different architectural perspectives, or rather, architectural design concepts, and how this will affect your architectural perspectives. Next to that, we'll do technical documentation that includes space, architecture, and structures on how you can prepare the documents needed for a structural design and how this will affect your architectural planning. We'll also talk about codes and regulations for electrical, fire, and even for mechanical plants. And third, on codes and regulations, part 3 involving plumbing and sanitation. In every project, it's required for an engineer, an architect, and planners to do site surveys. And we did this one rigorously when we did your surveying. Even as professional engineers, we also do site surveys. That includes checking the site for um, some unusual behaviors of the land. That includes location of flood zones, location of earthquake-prone zones, and even for instances where we want to plot the existing infrastructure. For a very big project, you would need to have a good background on your surveys, and that includes a detailed plot plan, which should get data from a geodetic survey. If you don't have that luxury of equipment and time, then you can just do reconnaissance survey. Just pick up a camera or a cell phone and then plot these points in a map, and this will guide you on how you can better design your site, your proposed lot, or even if it's a subdivision plan. Topography is one thing that we need to consider in this aspect. We know that if the site is flat, there's not much consideration for topography. However, if the lot is undulated, that means that topography is not flat. And if the elevation exceeds perhaps 5% to about less than 30%, then there's the need for excavation, land filling, or in some cases, perhaps you need to build your structure to be or to accommodate the available topography of the area. In some countries, laws and zones or even local codes prohibit excavation and land filling, as this may disrupt the already vulnerable structure of the soil. So like if you go to Korea, as shown in this picture, they don't or they minimize excavations and land filling. Instead, they build their structures on the slopes and they introduce geotechnical technologies and even techniques to strengthen the soil and not to harm the buildings that surround it. We also want to design that the building will have a low impact on the foundation systems. This could be in the form of geotechnical technologies or techniques such as shown in this one. This is a type of landslide protection mechanism, and this somehow protects the soil from moving or from sliding in times that the environment promotes this movement. This happens during extreme rainfall or in cases that there are major tremors or ground movements. The visual impact of the building is also formed by the landscape. So in Korea or even parts of China, they wanted to promote settlements around the city, and thus they needed to occupy the slopes. Somehow, these houses have adapted to the landscape, and in some cases, this may also disrupt the landscape. These are things that you need to prepare for when you design your site. That includes also the proposed home that we need to design. Normally, we have this detail from a subdivision plot. So this picture shown in the left-hand side is a subdivision plot wherein um, the land is actually divided into smaller lots from a mother title. So in most subdivisions, we have this one. And these lots were sold already, so their technical details are available. However, when we want to propose a building on the site, there's a need to resurvey. So it happened in one of my projects where the lot that we are to investigate belongs to Block 41 in this subdivision. However, the architect designed the whole structure and even the site to be flat. Interestingly, when we went to the site, the area is not flat. You see here that the highest elevation is at 167.5 meters, while the lowest elevation is at 164.5 meters. This shows that there is a 3-meter difference from the road towards the lowest point of the lot. And so we had to redesign and provide this topographic detail to the architect so that they or the team of the architects can redesign the whole structure. In the initial design, the house had to be 2-story, and the budget was at 4.5 million. However, when the revisions were implemented, considering the changes in the landscape, or the not just the changes, but the actual shape of the landscape, the price actually ballooned to 4.7 million. And we had to implement some additional spaces. So in this picture, this shows the redesign aspect of the lot. As you can see, the first floor and the second floor is what was the original concept of the architect. However, the red line is the actual ground level of the area, and that includes the 3-meter difference. While the architect assumed that it's already flat, the actual is actually with a distance or difference in elevation of 3 meters. To compensate for that, we had 2 proposals. The first proposal was to excavate soil. So I had to go to the site and check on what's the profile of the soil. Since we are limited with surface level instrumentation, that means that we need to gather geologic profile of the soil. We noticed that there are big chunks of rock. And we're worried that once we dig into the soil, this rock is quite big that we could no longer remove it from the surface. So the proposal is to retain half of the ground's original profile and then just excavate a little bit. So that's why there's an open area here where we excavated some of the soil. And some of the soil that were taken out were added into the front yard. As you can see, there's a little difference in the front yard and in the road. So the client actually was surprised of this difference in elevation, because when they bought the land, they even assumed that it's flat. So the architect had to be critical in the design. So we worked together to implement 3 schemes. The first scheme is what you will find here, the lower ground floor plan. Initially, we designed the open area for the main room, but we pondered that the area or even the room size might be too big for the main. So we changed the concept into a music room. In that concept, There's a music room and an open area of which the owner can add some amenities to the existing house and use this for their advantage. Interestingly, one of the son of the owner is into surfing. So he had to use the lower part of the house for all of the tools that he needed for his rather surfing tools. And some of their gadgets had to be installed. So they used the open area in the ground floor for that. So it gave the benefit for the owner to have more floor space or floor area for the whole house, and also for the architect to innovate on the requirements of the land. For us, as the civil engineering consultant for this project, we actually presented the necessary skills required for a civil engineer. That includes knowledge in the soil, knowledge in surveys, and also knowledge on the structure. Because as you can see, the whole building is like a four-story building. The first floor is found here, and there's a basement. So if you go down, technically that's not part of the first floor. That's below it. And above the first floor is its second floor. And then the owner wanted to have a semi-attic style. So there's a mezzanine floor on top, and that actually is not technically a full floor. So when this was presented to the subdivision management, they actually became angry because there's a policy from the homeowners association that all buildings should be at least 2-story high, or that not at least, but it should be limited to 2-story. But the architect and us, as the civil engineering consultants, challenge the code or the local law that they implemented, because technically an attic is not a floor. It's just a storage. It's not a room, and it's just an extension of the second floor. So cases like this actually happen, and you need to present whatever facts you have, whatever whatever things that you know about the law, and how you can present them to um, perhaps the managing body of that organization, such as in a subdivision or even other professionals. We actually took some advice from other architects and existing designs, and it seems that the design of the area is reminiscent of Tagaytay. In Tagaytay, they don't usually do cut and fill of the soil unless if it's for building roads. So most of the houses there, especially those that belong to the prime subdivisions, actually utilize the elevation by adding steel construction, such as shown in the right side, or in cases you can create buildings that doesn't have a uniform floor level, such as shown in the left side. So things like this benefit from the available topography of the land. However, as an environmental planner, there are some limitations and things of which you cannot convert land for development. As urban planners and environmental planners, we actually advocate that no structures be built if the slope of the land is at 30%. So that would mean that the initial distance um, would be, or the height is 30 meters, while the length of the land is 100 meters. We should dedicate this slope for forestry, agroforestry, or even for agriculture. If you build a house for that, in that area rather, that could jeopardize the structure of the soil. So that's why, as planners and civil engineers soon, you should redesign or perhaps reconsider houses or structures that are to be built at about 30% slope. Topographic details may also come as a or an advantage for you, as we know from the previous lessons that we want to design contemporary, modern, or tropical architectural styles. This includes the following designs. These concepts are actually reminiscent of the Bahay Kubo concept. And this concept is that houses are built on stilts. Stilts are actually columns. But traditionally, stilts in Philippine architecture are short and made of big logs. But because the government initiated programs to control cutting of big logs, we transitioned to reinforced concrete. Or in some cases, if you want your design to be industrial, then you can use reinforced concrete with steel. But either way, you can utilize the space below and you can not call it as the first floor technically. If it's on stilt, the first floor is the one on top. Okay. So here in these three pictures, the first floor is found on the upper floors. Okay. The ones or the spaces below is technically not your first floor. This is unique for Philippine architecture because we call it as the silong. Okay. Or sa Bisaya, ubos. The silong or ubos has functional usage. Normally, when you have livestock for rural communities, the silong is where you tie down your baka, your livestock, or your baboy. Or if you have pens for chicken, then you can use that area or space. But as we transition, as we develop, actually, this has changed, and thus this space can be utilized for park space or car park. Incidentally, because the area is also cool and there's no need for um, ventilation because it's natural, you can actually utilize the space and use it for the following purposes. First, it could be a makeshift kitchen. It can also be a bedroom, but the bedroom can have some free flow concepts or free flow systems where air can just flow freely and there's natural lighting. You can also use it for your makeshift living room, kitchen, or in some cases as storage. Okay, so technically that's not a first floor, it's just silong. Okay, so in other countries, like if you go to Europe, there's also a debate that the first floor is the ground floor, whereas the first floor is on top of the ground floor. So that's a different thing. But in the US, the first floor and ground floor is synonymous. And as you go up, that's the second floor. Okay. So our concept actually of floor levels is almost the same with European concept. That's because of the influence of the Spaniards. And we have adapted that system. So you can make use of the ground um, as an advantage again. But this doesn't just focus on a rolling terrain or a sloping terrain. You can also use this concept even though you have a flat space. Okay. In the houses that we built in our or rather in my family's case, all of our houses are on steel. This is because we had luxury of land. So because we had that space and we don't want to use the first floor as a habitable zone, but rather for makeshift purposes. So we place our storage there from construction materials to excess of these materials when we do construction, or even when we receive guests, we don't want them to go into the habitable zones. And we just realized this that this is beneficial in the time of the pandemic. Remember that in the pandemic, we have been um, really strict with health standards. And one thing is that whenever you receive guests at your home, you need to separate your guest from your family members just to allow social distancing. And if ever your guest has this virus or any other disease, it can't be transferred or um, infect your family members. That's also the concept of the Filipino home. You receive your guest at the first floor or the silong. However, if those guests are family members, then you can invite them to your first floor. Okay, so that's the concept ever since. And we just realized that now it's actually useful. Okay, even for protocols on social distancing, the Filipino home is actually resilient and adaptable to that. because the first floor is already um, following the protocol. Free of space, no obstruction, and everything is just free flowing. So that is a benefit during this COVID-19 pandemic. In developing your site development plans, you also need to consider what are things that are already existing on the land. One thing that you need to check is the distancing from water bodies. I had one project where I had to design a full tourism spot in Santa Ana, Taguluan, and we called it as Santa Ana Ridge. However, there were some problems when we tried to plan and apply for the um, environmental impact. You need to do this with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. So there's a full process on how you can check if your proposed site coincides into an area where could be an existing creek, or if there are effects in terms of the environment that includes the animals. It could be the fishes, it could be the endemic species that's there, or even the plants. So when we propose the site, um, there's actually an existing Timbol Creek as placed in this map. And when we check it from the old NAMRIA maps, it's actually existing. So you can see here that this blue line is the old creek that's mapped even from the 1950s. However, when we um, did a reconnaissance survey on site, the Timbal Creek is no longer existent. There's no water there. It's just soil, gravel, and big chunks of rock. So in that case, you need to consider not just what's existing, but also on what has been there before. So I hope that in your site development plans, you also consider these things. Okay, you cannot develop a land if it's occupying an old water body. And this is bounded by a law. You can check from this source what laws govern land ownership in relation to bodies of water. This is the case of Iloilo Esplanade. So what are the limits of this development? You cannot really convert that land with an old body of water to a building. What you can do is convert it to recreation, as can be allowed by law, or for agricultural purposes. So just like what Iloilo is doing and also what Cagayan de Oro is about to do. Iloilo is just way ahead of us, but Cagayan is following the trend. So it started with the Duao Park that's near the cathedral, and this will stretch down to the outflow point of Barangay Makabalan. So it's an 8.55 billion flood control project, which includes recreational zones. So in the near future, maybe in 10 years, if this gets finished, this part will be the new hotspot for tourism. Everything will be found here. And so there are limitations with what the government can do here. So they can't build big buildings or structures. So what they can do are just open structures. It could be an atrium, which is half open, or an esplanade. An esplanade basically is just a developed prime lot. So you can use it for recreation, for biking, cycling, fishing, selling of goods. And the limitations is that you can't build high, but you can build wide. So you may found in the future here some stores, some government structures, maybe small posts or things like that, which can be built on this part. So that's a limitation actually when you build near water bodies. Okay. And it's mandated by law that you cannot convert this lot into something far, far from development. So what are these limits? You can read through PD 1067. That's the actually water code of the Philippines. Now, you just need to take note, but you will learn this later in your higher subjects, that in terms of the mandate of the government, the, the Republic of the Philippines owns all bodies of water in the Philippines. within the 300,000 square kilometer boundary of the Philippines, within its exclusive economic zone, the owner is the Republic of the Philippines. So as a resident, you are entitled to use the water and develop it in some ways. And water, as we know from hydrology, comes in many forms. The rain, the flowing rivers, the oceans, the groundwater, and even your sweat is owned by the Republic of the Philippines. So the banks and streams and the shores of the seas and lakes throughout the entire length and within the zone of 3 meters in urban areas, 20 meters in agricultural areas, and 40 meters in forest areas along these margins are actually part of easement for public use. So we can use it for esplanade development. Just what Iloilo is doing and what Cagayan de Oro is following in the trend. We can use it for recreation, navigation, footage, fishing, and salvage. The law is clear. It cannot be used for buildings or construction. So if you build a resort, it should be very far from the mean sea level, unless you convert it into like a park, okay? Or in cases where you need to build houses near that water body, you need to protect the houses. So by the boundary of the river, you can actually build a dike. But certain meters from the dike, following this trend, 3 meters, 20, and 40 should not be developed. But what happened is that most of the development occurred even before the law was there. So there's a conflict. So in much parts of all cities in the Philippines, this is the trend. That settlement was there on the river when the law was enacted. So what happens is that private ownership was there even before the law was implemented. So there's no reason why most of our houses are located in flood-prone zones. Okay, but the law is clear that we should have this easement for us to build away from danger zones. So in your site development plans, if ever I find water bodies, lakes, or even shores or beaches, they need to follow this trend. 3 meters in urban, 20 in agriculture, 40 in forest areas. Now, how do we say it's urban, agriculture, and forestry areas? The local government units are the ones also, as representatives of the Republic of the Philippines and the national government, they're the ones entitled to zone your area. So if that zone is declared as agricultural, normally you cannot convert it to commercial. What you can do is use it for residential purposes. So that's why you can build a farmhouse, but you cannot build a mall on an agricultural lot. Unless, of course, there are some land conversion. But land conversion takes time in the Philippines. There are cases that this has been allowed, like big malls in Valencia. They were able to build malls in a very large sugarcane plantation. But it cannot occupy the whole lot. Okay, there's a certain percentage where you can convert. This is the control mechanism of the government to save some of our lots for agriculture. Okay, so later also I'll need to check your lots. If it's in urban zones, that's better. But if it's in an agricultural zone, I may have to ask further justification why you need to convert it to residential. So examples of properly distanced plans are the following. First is a site development plan. This is the project that we work on with the first project that I showed to you. This is actually in a Robinson's Land subdivision uptown. I'll not mention the name of the specific subdivision, but this is one example of a properly spaced site development plan. So you'll notice that from the sides of the building, you need to move 2 meters away. Okay. So in all sides, you notice that in this part where it's a little like angled with the bearing south 2521 west and 10.31 meters length, the minimum distance maintained here is at 2 meters. But you can actually use 1 meter. You notice na ay 1 meter sa lower left. This is allowed if the land is actually sloping. Okay, so in this case, this part is sloping. So when the owner tries to see the wall that's built, so it's not blocking the view. So that's allowed. Okay, so only in these parts, this is 1 meter. Okay, but in the other side, you can allow it to 2 meters. So 2 lang din siya. But on the rear side, you can squeeze it to 1 meter only if the land is not flat. But in the front stage, you will notice that it's using 4 meters. This is a major requirement in some subdivisions. It should be 4 meters. But if you own the lot, you can actually use 2.5. Okay. But that 2.5 meters should not be near a bedroom. Okay. In this plan, they actually utilize the frontage for living rooms. That includes the first floor and the second floor. All are living rooms. And bedrooms are located in the middle. So that's allowed. So you can go near the wall or your your front wall, but don't squeeze it less than 2.5 meters. Okay. An example, this is a site development plan where a driveway needs to be built and the proposed building follows the trend of the structure. So this will somehow shape the way you design your building footprint, as what's available inside is the only part that you can build on. So just like in the site development plan, everything that's inside is the only part that you can build on. All other spaces outside can be used for non-habitable rooms. So you can use it for a car park, you can use it for your pets, like you have a dog or a cat, you can use that. But you can't use it to build your own bedroom. Okay, so I hope that you get to implement these concepts in your site development plans. I need to see these things. And just a gentle reminder of the following deadlines. Laboratory exercises 1, 1.1, and 2.0 were already due. So if you ever failed to submit them, just send a request for extension. But take note that there's a 20% deduction in points. Laboratory exercise 3.1 is due tomorrow, April 21, and they should cover the architectural part 1. The contents and minimum requirements of architectural part 1 is already uploaded in eLearn, so kindly check them right away. For laboratory exercise 3.2, this will be uploaded, should be uploaded on April 24, 2021. And your midterm compilation should be in by April 30, 2021. Okay, so in the next lecture, I'll talk about architectural designs and concepts and how you can use this to better design your structures. So thank you for your time and see you in the next asynchronous or recorded session. Bye-bye.